Staying on the offensive side of the ball, there's really no questions at running back. We've talked about it at length. Nick Singleton and Katron Allen, the incumbents, and we've talked at length about what Trey Potts and company are going to provide in a supplementary role. So I don't necessarily want to spend a lot of time on the running backs. However, it's the offensive line that I think is a really interesting time right now, in that almost from center to the left, you feel pretty good about who you're going to get in the starting rotation, barring some sort of injury. Olu Fashanu, who's projected to be either the first or second tackle off the board next year's NFL draft.
So I'm saying
Left
first,
guard
first
Landon Tank.
overall.
Yes, sir. Left guard Landon Tangwall, who we've had on the show before and seems primed to go for this season, recovering from injuries last season. And then the assumption is that Hunter Norzad is going to shift over from what he was doing predominantly a right guard last season and move into center, which is something he did substantially at Cornell. Juice Scruggs was in that center role last season. Now he's off to the National Football League, and I believe the Houston Texans. So good for Juice. It's the right side of the line that it's like, okay, there is a bit more of a competition. Right guard, right tackle. Uh, are there some names out there that are floating around to you that you're like, you know what? Caden Wallace is going to lock down right tackle once and for all this year, or there's going to be guys here and there who are really making life difficult for him. And then Sal Wormley is the anticipated right guard.
I think you roll with Sal and Kata to go into this season. I mean, I always lean on those older offensive linemen just from the standpoint of that's a true developmental position. When you start to understand how to use your body, these guys go through a great the physical developmental period when they get to college. So sometimes the offensive line, when it clicks, I remember those guys coming out of high school being athletic, big bodies that can move. And I would expect them to hold that side down, to be honest.
Now, there will be competition. Last season, we saw JB Nelson, Nick Dawkins get involved. Drew Shelton also saw significant time at right tackle. Vega Ioane is somebody that you and I have talked about a lot on this show and has also been praised by the coaching staff, James Franklin, as well, for just how freaking big he is. But he's not just a big body. Like, this is a very talented person for 6'5", pushing 360 pounds. What I look at on this for this group of offensive linemen, let's not forget about Addison Penn, the transfer from Duke, 6'2", 304, redshirt junior. So potentially in the mix there. But also there's a really talented group of underclassmen in this offensive line room, and especially the guys that just came in as true freshmen, redshirt freshmen. I don't know necessarily, Justin, if there's going to be an expectation for these guys to jump in and play immediately, but staying healthy for this entire unit has been a problem for the last few years. Uh, when you're in that early phase as a freshman, sophomore, and you're trying to push for reps, how do you approach this time of year?
I mean, you're approaching this time of year almost like it's game day, to be completely honest, because you have to push yourself in practice and training camp, not only to get ready to play a game, but you have to earn the trust of the staff members that you can play a game when the lights come on, right? Because there's so many different players that have great springs or have great preseason camps. And then as soon as you put in the pregame install throughout that week, it's like mental errors, brain farts, that level of trust for, especially for an offensive lineman coming into camp is critical. So like, I would actually think if anybody's going to have some angst, it would be a younger offensive lineman coming into camp, because you're dealing again with the developmental curve of the physicality of it. The mental aspect of offensive line is extremely difficult. And then also, I mean, you have weapons around you. So if weapons aren't working like around you as an offensive lineman, people start pointing to the offensive line being somewhat of the issue, right? With a good running backs and a great quarterback, there's a lot of pressure. And yeah, the upside is to perform, not necessarily seen when you excel. So I would think that the young offensive line coming in need to be locked in.
The thing about the offensive line over the last few years, last year was definitely a step in the right direction. It was really positive. I found it so interesting going into the 2021 season. James Franklin had some very positive things to say publicly multiple times about the way the offensive line would perform. It just didn't work out that way in 2021, and there were some injuries, so there are a lot of factors involved. Last season, he was a little bit more reserved, Justin, and you know him well, is that he was kind of like, I'll let you guys see for yourself. And we all saw for ourselves, and we saw how well the running backs did and the progress in the rushing attack. You haven't heard him say too much about the offensive line during this offseason. And I think that decline in public statements means an increase in confidence. What would you say to that?
Yeah, you don't always want to show your poker hand too fast, right? Like you shut out
Because
his
he
bluff.
uses the media to get to the right players and inspire them in the right ways, right?
Sure. I'm saying you called his bluff and you understand some of the telltale signs. So I mean, I think that's a nice hypothesis going into the season. I mean, for sure though, like we watch as a defensive player, as a personnel person, you watch the other coach talk about their personnel to get an understanding of any type of tips that are given away. And I think that is legitimate for him not to bring up those things, feel a little confident in those guys up front.